Hi, everybody. I'm Tony Marcolini. Welcome to the podcast. It may interest you to know. I'm really honored to have with me retired FBI agent and author Robert Wittman today. So, welcome, Robert.
Hi, Tony. How you doing?
Good. I think I'm going to call you Bob, right? Is that okay? I know that's
That's
technically.
that's great. Robert was my dad.
Yeah. A lot of people that way, right? That's how they distinguish between father and son.
Exactly.
I know I actively chased after you to have you on the podcast because I read your book. And wow, it's such a compelling read. Your story and your journey that gets you to your point in time now where you're retired. Your book, Priceless, recounts your, I want to say, journey to the FBI, right? Because you're not initially an FBI agent, but it's something you think about, and so your journey to get to the point where you're a member, you are an FBI agent, and then helping to build the FBI art team, art crime team, I should say. They're not painting, right? They're chasing masterpieces. So can you speak a little bit about what it meant to you to finally become an FBI agent?
Oh, sure, Tony. Well, you say I'm retired. I'm really not. I'm actually uh, president of my own company now. I left the FBI in 2008 and started Robert Wittman Incorporated, and I'm busier now actually than I was when I was in the bureau. Uh, because at the FBI doing law enforcement, I could only get involved in cases that involve criminal activity, law enforcement cases, and of course, probably 80% of the disputes in the art business, in the overall art business, are not criminal. They're civil cases. So I could never talk to those. I could never speak to those, while I was there. Now I can do both. And so I do investigations where I turn that stuff over to turn the evidence over to the law enforcement, whatever it happens to be, local or federal. And then I do a lot of civil material as well, civil cases involving disputes, and doing investigation and research into that, insurance give ups, that type of thing. So, it's funny. I've retired from the bureau, but I'm busier than ever, doing other cases, for
Well,
private industry.
It's
As
it's
far as
interesting
getting,
to me that
go ahead.
that art actually became your passion, right? I mean, sort of.
Well, yeah, what happened was in 2000, I'm sorry, 1988, when I was going into the bureau, there was a great TV show on that I used to enjoy. It was called Miami Vice. Some of you might remember that show. Well, I wanted to be Crockett. I wanted to be that guy, on the cigarette boat with the white suit, driving Lamborghinis, in Miami with all the cool music and everything.
Yeah.
And so I thought the only way to do that would be the FBI, because I knew I wasn't going to go to Miami PD. I lived in Baltimore. So I went in the FBI. I got in, and they said, "Well, where do you want to be?" Well, they asked me. Give me three. They said, "Give us three offices you'd like to go to." So I said, "I'd like to go to Miami because Miami Vice. I like to go to Honolulu because nice weather, I think, and or I'd like to be back in Baltimore, where I lived." And I got Philadelphia. So it was a little different. Going to
Yeah.
Philadelphia was totally different from Miami or Honolulu. That's for sure. More like Baltimore.
Yeah.
And when I first got to Baltimore, I mean, I'm sorry, to Philadelphia, I was assigned to a property crime squad. And this property crime squad was doing truck hijacking cases because there were a lot of problems in 1988 with the crack wars. And a lot of the truck drivers who were going between New York and Miami were giving up their loads because they were crack addicts.
Mm.
So, the FBI had what they call a truck hijacking squad. And I was assigned to that as it's a property crime squad. But the thing was, when I first got there, the first two cases I was assigned involved theft from the University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, and a theft from the Rodin Museum. And in both
Mhm.
cases, I was ultimately successful in recovering the stolen artifacts and arresting one of the subjects. And so, as a result, the Bureau sent me to art school in Philadelphia to the Barnes Foundation, and then to gemology school to learn about diamonds at the GIA in Santa Monica, and to Zales Corporation in Dallas for jewelry and gem identification, schools. And so once I was trained, that's what I was into.
Well, so art is not exactly just art, right? I mean, it's a vast amount of antiquities art, like you just said, diamonds. The tentacles for that team wind up being wide reaching,
Yeah,
correct?
the program at the FBI is not necessarily, we call it the art crime team just for convenience sake, but the truth is it's called the cultural property program. And cultural property encompasses everything, Tony. It could be anything from, baseball cards to comic books. It doesn't matter. And antique cars, Rolex watches, all of these things are high value assets that are part of the cultural property program. You have to remember the art business is a $200 billion business worldwide every year, 200 billion, and the art theft market, which is estimated at about 6 billion. So that's it's pretty hefty as far as the crime part of it, but it also encompasses all different types of theft and frauds, forgeries, and fakes. Criminals follow the market; they follow money. And recently, just to give you an idea, a Mickey Mantle baseball card sold for $12 million. It was a rookie card. $12 million for a baseball card, little piece of cardboard. A just
That somebody
Tom,
probably got, when they were 4 years old.
yeah, yeah, a
Yeah.
Tom Brady rookie card from the year 2000, signed, sold for 2.2 million. So these are now parts of the cultural property program the FBI would investigate in the event of a theft.
Wow, I mean, it's really fascinating. I mean, your book recounts so many different instances where you were called in to investigate cases that you've actually worked on. I mean, the one thing that kind of rings true for all of them is that you had to kind of be a good actor, right? I mean, you essentially step into roles where you're trying to fool people, pretending to be, most of your work is undercover, right? There really isn't a moment where you go, where you're Columbo, where you're coming into situations, right? And you're asking questions and you're investigating. You're setting up stings.
I did both, Tony. I guess the way it worked was if I could do a case and do it overtly by doing interviews, subpoenas, grand jury type situations, that would be fine. That was a good way to do a case. But also, many times in theft cases, you have to prove, the mens rea, the mind. You have to prove that the person knew it was stolen. And especially with like an interstate transportation of stolen property statute, the elements of that crime are knowledge that the piece is stolen, $5,000 in value, and it has to cross the state or international border. But the hardest part is not the money, and it's not the crossing of the border. It's proving that the person knew it was stolen. So many times, the only way you could get that element was by working undercover, which I often did. And so, it wasn't being an actor. I talk about in my book, Priceless, that one of the most important things about working undercover in law enforcement is not thinking of yourself as an actor, because actors get multiple takes. If you mess something up, you can just, trash that particular tape or whatever and do it again. In law enforcement, you only get one shot. Okay. And if you mess it up, you might get shot. So it's a whole different situation. So really the trick is to keep everything as truthful as possible. Be yourself, feel comfortable in the role. And there's certain little aspects to it, tricks of the trade, and tradecraft. But really, it's most important that you keep everything real, because I might be undercover for a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe sometimes 2 years on a case. And how am I going to remember if I'm telling a whole bunch of lies? You have to be truthful. If you have 3 kids, you say you got 3 kids. Keep all that stuff real, because you can't remember all the lies.
Yeah, there's an interesting line I thought in your book where you say you befriend and then you betray.
That's
What?
undercover work. Any undercover work anybody does, whether it's narcotics or public corruption or money laundering, you have to befriend the subject. They have to trust you to do criminal activity with you. And there's certain psychological techniques that you can use to do that as well. It's all training and tradecraft, but you do have to do that, and then you betray. It's what you do.
There had to be, I guess, a point in time where that weighed on you to a certain extent. Now,
Yeah, well, the FBI stands for Federal Bureau of Investigation, but it's also the buzzwords are fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And when you're lying undercover, acting as a criminal, the bravery and integrity part kind of goes out the window. So it's not a natural thing for an FBI agent to lie. I mean, we're not liars. It's not how it is. To get in and to be an agent, you just don't think like that.
Right.
But working undercover, you have to. I remember it was always interesting whenever I would take the stand as a witness in any of those cases. The first thing the defense attorney would always be doing a cross examination, and he'd always ask me, he'd say, "Agent Wittman, are you a liar?" And of course, the response is only in cases where I'm undercover and creating a legend for the case. And but
Mhm.
they'd always ask you to try to prove to the jury that you're a liar. And that was always the first question. It's not comfortable. It's not a comfortable place to be. But
No.
but
I
sometimes you
wouldn't.
have to do these things to get the to recover the property or whatever you're going to do.
Well, you've touched so many interesting cases, famous cases, the Geronimo a headdress, right?
This war
Case,
bonnet,
the
yeah,
war
yeah.
bonnet. You recovered that.
Yeah,
Um,
that was what's so interesting about the working in the art crime scenario, is that every case was different. So, in one situation, I'd be going to the University of Pennsylvania Museum and learning about American Indian artifacts because I did a 6 month undercover in Santa Fe, breaking up what they call the Santa Fe Indian Mafia, which is a group of dealers who sell NAGPRO or banned material, from the Pueblo tribes that are basically stolen material. So you had to know what you were talking about. You had to find out what it was. In another case, I'd have to learn about a cradle, maybe a cradle, what do you call it, uh, frame that was used to back up a Peter Bruegel painting that I was going after. And to be able to prove that this painting was real, I had to be able to check the cradle frame. And so I did that at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Every case was different, so it was always interesting. You're always learning new things.
can you talk a little bit about recovering the Bill of Rights, right? There's the original one of the original copies. That has to be one of the ones you get questions a lot about, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I get questions about that. Usually, one of the big questions is, what was the most valuable thing you ever recovered? And value. And it's interesting because there's two types of value. That's what I always say.
Mm,
There's cultural value, and then there's monetary value. Now, I think one of the most culturally valuable pieces I ever recovered was a battle flag. And it was carried by the 12th Regiment Corps d'Afrique, which was one of the first African American regiments in the U.S. Army. It was carried at the Battle of Port Hudson during the Civil War. And in that battle, 5 individuals were shot out from under the flag. They were the standard bearers, and each one was wounded or killed carrying the flag. And so that was stolen around 1978 en route from a fort in Washington to a fort in South Carolina. And en route, it went missing. And we did an undercover with that and recovered it. It was valued at about $30,000. So the value was substantial, but $30,000. But the cultural history of that, that was carried in battle. It was the first time these African American troops could fight for their freedom and the freedom of their children and grandchildren throughout history. And just think about the value of that.
right.
Now, what you
Priceless, like
mentioned,
the name of the book.
exactly. Now, what you mentioned was the Bill of Rights. We covered that was being offered for sale to the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia. And it was stolen in 1865 by a Union trooper. As Sherman's troops were coming back north from Atlanta, they stopped in Raleigh, North Carolina to take the state. And basically, at the state capitol, and they went in, this trooper, and he took the Bill of Rights right out of the state capitol and spirited it away to Indiana. He sold it in Indiana, and then 130 years later, it was being offered for sale to the National Constitution Center. Of course, it belonged to the state of North Carolina. It's their
Yeah.
Bill of Rights. It was one of the 13 that was sent out by George Washington in 1789 for ratification. It's actually our Constitution. So we did an undercover on that as well. We were able to recover that. I acted as a rich philanthropist who was buying it for the Constitution Center, and we got it to come out of the woodwork where we were able to recover it. And that was worth $100 million. If you could buy one of those for real, I mean, in other words, if you actually could get one, which you can't because they're all owned by the states, it would be $100 million purchase. And interestingly enough, the only other document that would be worth more would be the Declaration of Independence, and only because there's only one. There's
Yeah.
copies of it, but the original would be one worth more. But you see, that's 100 million, but we already have, I think, 9 of those. And, that battle flag is one of a kind now. And, they both represent really great history. One's
What's
100
it
million,
like?
one's 30,000.
What's it like when you have that moment of recovery and then suddenly this item, it's in your hands? Like, what is that moment like?
Well, it's funny. There's two things that happen. One is you want to protect it because usually, like, in a sting operation, there'll be a SWAT team or something coming in to arrest people. So I would run into the bathroom with the painting to try to keep it from getting damaged. In one case,
And
I
through all that trouble, blood is splurting. Yeah.
another case, I hid under a bed with it while the SWAT team was arresting the bad guys in a Spanish hotel. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is you get this feeling of eureka. It's a really great feeling for a minute. It's like your feet don't touch the ground. It's almost when, I don't know if you have any children, but when you have children and they're healthy when they're born, and for about a week, you're just feeling elated. You just feel great, about that. But this doesn't last that long. This might only go for an hour or two, right? And then I'll tell you what happened. It's a big letdown afterwards, because you've got this tiger by the tail, and you might have been spending 6 months chasing this piece, and doing all the chess moves and playing the game, and finally you get there and you get it, okay? And then it's just kind of a letdown because now that's over, and you got to start all over again on the next one. And so the next one's coming, or you usually have that one working anyway, working as you go along. And it's start all over again.
Let's talk about some of the art. Because you've recovered, I think, or you at least have chased Rembrandt and Picasso. Um, and so can you tell, well, what's the most impactful of all of the investigations for a famous piece of art that you
I think well, it's interesting. I think one of the most impactful pieces of recovery was we recovered a golden artifact that was stolen from a tomb in Peru, and that wasn't art, so to speak. It was antiquity. But the reason it was impactful was because we recovered it. It was taken out of the country by a Panamanian diplomat, and he smuggled it into the United States. We did another sting operation where I was acting as a broker for a gold collector, and this piece was worth about 1.6 million, and it was the largest piece of gold ever found. It was a piece of body armor in a tomb in the Americas. So we recovered that, and the reason it was impactful was because at that point, diplomats got the word that they can't be stealing artifacts. They can't go into the State Department and go to a country and start bringing things back illegally,
yeah.
just because because they could, or had diplomatic immunity. It didn't work that way. So that kind of, it was a sea change for the diplomatic community. And the State Department started teaching their diplomats and having courses about not bringing these pieces back, and doing that. So that was kind of a impactful piece. I guess one of the best artworks was a Rembrandt self-portrait that was stolen at gunpoint from the Swedish National Museum. And we were able to do an undercover operation in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I acted as a buyer for the Russian mob. It was worth about 35 million. And I was offering 250,000 for it. And we were able to recover that like I say, in a sting operation in Copenhagen. And that was impactful because we worked with the Swedish National Police, we being the FBI, as well as with the Danish National Police from Denmark. And so it just showed how, 3 countries could work together to recover this one artwork. Now, they wouldn't have done it for a Chevrolet or a Mercedes, but for a
Right.
Rembrandt, it was really important. And, this piece was done when he was 24 years old, it was 1630. Beautiful little painting, it's on copper. It was a good example of his use of chiaroscuro, where he used the shadow, of his face, which we see a lot of today. So, I mean, it was a neat piece and a neat case.
Your book talks a lot about the last case, right? The that you chased, well, actually a Rembrandt from stolen from the Isabella.
Stuart Gardner Museum.
There
Yeah.
the museum, and the famous heist that I think remains unresolved today. I don't think any of the pieces have been recovered. You can correct me if I'm wrong.
No,
Um,
it's true. True.
yeah, but then you tried. You came so close, right, to getting one of the pieces back. What was that case? Being in the throes of that case like?
Well, from 2005 to 2008, along with other cases, I was undercover chasing the Vermeer and the Rembrandt. There was a Vermeer called the Concert, stolen at the Gardner Heist in 1990, as well as a Rembrandt seascape called the Storm Over the Sea of Galilee, which was the only seascape that Rembrandt ever did. All told, 13 items of art were stolen that night, St. Patrick's Day night, 1990, and the total value of that heist that night was $300 million. None of those pieces have been recovered, and today they're worth about 500 million. So that's the largest single property crime in U.S. history. So I think it's amazing to think of, the largest property crime in history was an art theft from a museum, and it's still out there. And on top of that, there's a $10 million reward. So if any of your podcast listeners have any idea where this is, Tony's a lawyer and I'm here, so give us a call.
Yeah.
There's just a $10 million reward. But yeah, I was chasing the Rembrandt and the Vermeer from 2006 to 2008. And basically, I had an informant that had surfaced in Miami, Florida. And we were able to work him into introducing me into the gang in the south of France, who supposedly had those two paintings. And basically, they were asking 30 million for it. We were able to recover two Picassos in that case that were stolen from the granddaughter of Pablo Picasso in Paris. They were worth about 65 million. We also recovered four paintings that were stolen at gunpoint from the Museum of Fine Arts in Nice, two Bruegels, a Monet, and a Sisley. Those two paintings belonged to the Musée d'Orsay, which was the National Museum of France. But ultimately, we did not get our American paintings because of things happen in international cases that sometimes you can't control.
Was that heartbreaking?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you what, your listeners, they should read Priceless and they'll see the whole story.
Oh, it's gripping, right? It's a gripping story, that takes you through it. And it really got me interested in like art crime and antiquities crime. I think it's misunderstood mostly, right? I don't think people truly understand what that is, or that they're the market, sort of the underbelly of the black market for this type of thing and the value it has. I mean, I would have never guessed. This is where the biggest amounts of value in terms of value for crime is happening, more than the drug trade, more than almost any other type of crime. And it probably has the smallest staff investigating it, which is curious to me. And I'm guessing it's because no one is typically hurt, unlike, the drug trade where you need to get rid of it because people will be killed. Kids will be killed, who get addicted. And so human life obviously weighs, higher than money. But in terms of financial crime, I don't think there's a bigger one than what you're battling in with your team.
Well, fraud is huge. I mean, money laundering and fraud are big dollar amounts. The 500 million from Gardner is the biggest, but the Madoff fraud was billions. So really, it's not it's part of a property crime, and the reason it's not as investigated with as many people, it's not as many resources, because it is property crime. If you have your Mickey Mantle baseball card stolen from your collection and you call the Philadelphia Police Department or the New York NYPD, you'll get a detective and he probably won't think much of it, because he's handling all kinds of rapes and aggravated assaults and all that sort of thing, carjackings. Your baseball card's probably not that high on his list. Of course, so it's worth a lot of money. So there's the difference. It's very valuable. And nowadays, that's what's happening. And yeah, values are high, but it's still a property crime, which is usually the lowest priority of most police departments and investigative agencies.
Well, you guys, you recovered famous things that, not art, like the Tom Brady, I think, Super Bowl ring, wasn't that
Mhm.
recovered? Uh,
It was his jersey.
Jersey.
Yeah.
And the I think the slippers, right, from the ruby
Ruby
red
slippers.
slippers.
Yeah. Yeah. They were recovered. They were stolen from a museum in Minnesota. And
Judy Garland's, yeah.
Judy Garland. Yeah. Well, they were actually the production companies. They weren't
Well,
hers. And there's some doubt that she ever wore them. I think she had three sets. And, she wore one or two, and there's some doubt about actually being worn, but it was one of the three sets of slippers.
that were made, available
Yeah.
for the movie.
And they weren't real rubies, by the way.
I wouldn't think.
Yeah.
But when you actually get to the end of a case, it must be very fulfilling to see that the art or that piece returned to where it belongs. You have to have that moment, and then not be able to take the glory. Because in your book, you talk about the fact that you always had to continue hiding your face, right? To be able to continue doing more stings. You're not really out front, doing the press conferences and the like. You're
No,
sort of in
no.
the back.
I liked it like that. I like being in the back and just doing the job. And, because towards the end of my career, it became popular. Art theft became a popular thing in the Bureau, and people wanted to get involved in it. And that was okay. See, throughout my career, and, for 18 years out of the 20, nobody wanted to do it. It was not a way to move high up in the FBI, put it that way. You didn't get promoted very well because there was no place to go. But I liked it because it was actually investigation. That's why I joined. I didn't join to be an administrator. I wanted to do street work, investigations. So towards the end, it became very competitive. People wanted to get the publicity, get the press, and get their faces in the paper and all that sort of thing. And I didn't care for that because I had to do more cases. It wasn't until I wrote the book, and 2 years after I was out of the FBI, that I actually had a photograph taken, and that was the first time. And that was with the New York Times. When the book came out, they wanted to do a story, so we went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and they did a photo spread for the New York Times. And after that, I couldn't go undercover anymore, obviously, because now my
Obviously.
face is known. But that's okay. I don't work undercover anymore anyway.
The the education they sent you for art, really, to learn the difference. I mean, what was that? What was that experience like? I mean, did you truly have a love for art before then? Or was it just the job? Like, oh, I need to know this
Yeah.
to be able to.
Well, here's the thing. The art crime world is not about art history. It's not about art education. It's about the business of art, how to do a deal. Okay. And the art world, as far as galleries and deals are concerned, but it's pretty close to the drug world is how it works. The commodity, the art, is sold in many different ways. And so doing a deal was more important, knowing how to do a deal, than it was to know about the art itself. And I had that background because my parents were in the antiques business. So as a result of them being in the antiques business, I knew how to do a deal in the art world. I worked for my dad. He had three antique stores in Baltimore. So as a result, I knew how to do deals when it came to antiques and art. So that was more important than the actual history, but it was good to go to school. And so I did it was one day a week for 4 hours. I went to the Barnes Foundation for 9 months and learned about the different, histories of art, and more so about identification of the difference between the types of art. When it comes to policemen and law enforcement, they don't know the difference between, say, a Picasso and a Rembrandt. It's just names. Knowing that difference, knowing the difference between a Picasso and being able to say, okay, that's not a Rembrandt, was important. And I think anyone who goes to the Barnes Foundation even for a few hours, because of the immense amount of artwork there, if you could just sit and study for a few hours, after a while, you'll know the difference between a Cézanne and a Renoir and a Manet and a Monet, how they all have their own genre, style, stroke, brush strokes. And you look at that and you can tell, well, that's probably not a Rembrandt. Not a Renoir. That's probably not a Cézanne, because it's just not created the same way of all the ones you've seen, because they all had their own styles. And so you can recognize styles. That's a big deal, when it comes to law enforcement. Now, I can't tell you the difference between a good Renoir and a bad Renoir. If someone says this is a Renoir, I'll take their word for it until I can prove it's not. But, I can tell you it's not a Cezanne because I can tell the style, you see.
So your favorite, most exciting case, what would you call your most exciting case, or the case you felt most alive?
Uh, that's a hard question.
It is,
uh,
right?
because it was every case when I was doing the case, it was most exciting.
Yeah.
In other words, you had to be up for it to want to do it. And it was funny, I'll tell you, Tony, one of the most unexciting cases that I had personally was one of my last undercover cases. It was a case I was doing in Warsaw, Poland, and an individual had gone into the National Museum in Zimbabwe, in Harare, Zimbabwe, and they stole some African masks and some African headrests, very valuable material, very old, ancient material. And so they were from the Makunde tribe. Anyway, he took these things back to Poland, after he stole them, and he offered them for sale to a dealer in the United States. That's where we got the lead. So I went over to Poland as a buyer of African masks, right? I met with the guy, and so I was in a hotel I think the Sheraton in Warsaw, and I was on my way to the Hilton where we were going to have the meeting. The Polish National SWAT team was on both sides, of the room. They had rooms on either side. They were ready to go. And it's an interesting thing. It was about 11:30 at night. It was in December of 2000, I think 7. And I'm on my way over to the hotel in a cab. And I'm in the back seat. And I'm thinking to myself, this is weird because I'm not excited. I wasn't, nervous. And I thought to myself, I got to quit doing this now because I'm losing the edge. That excitement, that nerves, that's what gets you, that's your edge. That's what keeps you from getting hurt, keeps you going, I didn't have it. Didn't have it. It was just boring. Really.
So you'd say there's a certain sense of, was there a certain sense of stage fright? And I know you said it
Always,
really wasn't a liking, but right before you're about to,
always, because you don't know what you're going to run into. You don't know if it's going
Sure.
to be possibly what we call a reverse where they try to rob me because you're carrying money, or it could be a situation where they might shoot you or something. Anything could happen. You could mess up the case, say the wrong thing, but I didn't have any of that. And I did it. We did the case. We pulled it off. Everything worked out fine. The only bad part was that the Polish SWAT team drank all the booze in the mini bars on either side of the rooms. And so as a result, I got the bill because I had rented the 3 rooms. So I had to figure out how to get the FBI to pay the booze, the mini bar tab in both of those rooms. It was like $800. It was a lot. So
A lot of alcohol. Yeah.
yeah, that was tough coming back and figuring that one out. But no, and at that point, that was kind of one of my last undercover operations because I just didn't have that edge anymore. I'd done it so many times that I kind of got bored. And
There
so,
has to be there has to be something, Bob, that when you finally got it and it was in your hands, right? Whether it's the lock of George Washington's hair, whether it's that Constitution, whether it's like you said, a Rembrandt, that when you finally you were in awe of getting to touch it, like having it there and holding it. There had to be at least one time where that's how you felt. I'm sure
oh
all
yeah,
the times it was great, like you said, that you were kind of on a high, but was there a sense of awe with any particular item? Like this
oh
is
yeah, yeah. All of them were a sense of awe. I mean, to be actually in the presence of, a 1630 Rembrandt, done on copper, like that. It's worth $35 million, for sale if you could sell it. Yeah, yeah, of course. It was an awe-inspiring type of thing that to be able to not be in that position. And I actually took a picture of it holding it. That was neat. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And it was that way in every case. The battle flag, the Rembrandt, the Bill of Rights. I mean, the Peruvian artifact that was, the biggest piece of gold that was ever discovered in a tomb in the Americas. The Picassos in Paris, Goya in Madrid. All those cases were exactly what what you're saying. Yeah, you got that feeling at the end. But then again, every time there was that letdown afterwards.
Yeah.
The letdown was that's over. Now we got to move on to the next one. You know,
Yeah. Now what
and
do I do with myself?
yeah, well, not so much. Well, we already always had cases going, but now we have to start. You know that's done. That tiger's caught. That tail's let go. You know, now we got to grab the next tail and follow that one. Grab that tiger, and and pull that one off. So because you never knew if it was going to work out or not.
When were you the most afraid? Like thinking this may be my last moment here.
I had one case involving those two Picassos in Paris. The police officer, one of the police officers in the jail, told the subjects that I was the informant out of Miami, and so they had set up a hit on me. So what they did was they requested a meeting. So I met them in the bar at the Diplomat Hotel, and at that point, the word was out to kill me. So it was a little bit, it was a little stressful. you know, I never carried weapons undercover because that basically just ramped up the danger. If I have a gun, the other guy's got to have a gun. You know what I mean? And so you're just ramping it up. And you never want to create a situation where the other, or the subject is worried about you doing something to
Yeah.
him. You want him to feel comfortable. So, in that case, when I met with those two individuals, their supposedly their history was they used knives for their work. So I had a gun in each pocket. So I figured, they'll bring knives, I'll bring guns, and we'll see who wins. In the end, I talked them out of it.
Okay. So you were aware that the hit was that there
Oh yeah,
was something. Oh, wow.
yeah. Oh, well, but you have to. You still have to face it down. The most important weapon that a good undercover agent or a good undercover person has is his mouth, being able to talk your way through things to defuse bad situations.
Now tell me about the work you're doing now.
Well, now we do investigations. In fact, I do some undercover work where it's to the point where, I'll get something to the point where it's ready to be turned over, and then I turn everything over to law enforcement, and they can finish it off. But we also do a lot of expert witness testimony. I've been involved in probably the biggest civil fraud cases. One involving the Noodler Gallery in New York City, another one involving a Russian oligarch who had bought the Da Vinci Salvador Mundi painting that was sold for 400 million. He was involved in a civil lawsuit against Sotheby's, so I was involved in that case. So I do many different things now. Security surveys for museums. We just recently conducted a complete security survey for the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. I'm going to be running a show for the American Numismatic Association, the World's Fair of Money. I'll be running the security for their show next month. And I've also been doing a series of lectures. I have two of them set up right now. One with IFAR, which is the International Foundation for Art Research. If your podcast people are interested, they could go to the IFAR website, sign up. I'm going to be doing a series of 5 lectures, all about different types of art crime, everything from theft of just iconic paintings to antiquities to books and documents to fakes, frauds, and forgeries. So that's a whole 5 lecture series on art crime. And I basically talk about all cases that I worked on myself, so that they're all firsthand, situations, and you hear all the backgrounds of what really happened, not what's in the newspaper, but what really happened, and how that affected the art world and history in general. So if they're interested in that, I'm doing that with IFAR and also with Christie's Education later on in the fall in November. So that's many things we're doing.
I'll put the link up for sure.
Yeah.
Um, your book is a really great read. I mean, I highly recommend it. It's so fascinating to really delve into something that you give no thought about. Right? Prior to the book, I never thought about art crimes in the United States or elsewhere. I never thought about the fact that what undercover for that sort of thing would look like. But when you do, you realize, wow, this is something that is really exciting. Everybody sees you talked about Miami Vice. Everybody sees the undercover, that's there to catch a murderer or a drug dealer, but nobody thinks about this more white collar crime. Another white and it's white collar crime that comes with its own danger. Because you said that anytime there's money changing hands or something has a lot of value, people are going to be going after it, competing for it, killing for it, right? To the extent that greed is an overriding theme in most of those cases, right? People
Oh,
are,
when you talk about white collar, but it's not, it depends. The frauds, forgeries, and fakes, that's white collar crime. That's people creating these fakes and things. But with the theft, like the Rembrandt was stolen from the Swedish National Museum, that was a gunpoint robbery. So, you had three guys with machine guns going into the museum at that point. It's a whole different group of people. So you have different groups of criminal subjects, and it depends on what kind of group you're dealing with. So some of it's white collar, but some of it's just straight up armed robbery, and that's a whole different kind of investigation.
yeah, you did jewel heists too, right?
Yeah,
Old
yeah, yeah.
fashioned jewel heist.
I ran a task force that investigated smash and grab robberies all throughout the United States. That wasn't undercover, that was overtly. We had gangs in Philadelphia, over 100 people we arrested and convicted for these series of smash and grabs. They were getting basically getting money from some of the jewelers in Philadelphia on Jewelers Row to go travel. And they would travel to different cities, Washington State, Miami, wherever, and then go do smash and grab robberies at high-end malls and steal Rolex watches. And they would bring them back to Philadelphia and sell them back to the jewelers for half price, which is a great deal for the jewelers because Rolex watch prices are very well controlled. And there is no such thing as a half price Rolex watch.
Yeah.
And so they would sell them for half price, but of course they cost nothing for the thieves. So that was all profit. And so they had done over 100 of these robberies in the year before we started the task force. And by the time we were done 2 years later, we had 3 robberies world nationwide. So we had knocked it down from 100 to 3. So we destroyed the whole crime problem. So that was a jewelry theft task force. I worked with the Major Crimes Division of the Philadelphia PD.
Well, that's why they probably sent you for the training on diamonds too, right? To be able to.
Uh, yeah, for diamonds and for jewelry. Yeah, gems, gemology.
So till today, you can look at something and you can tell its value.
Yeah, I can tell if it's real. I can tell you what a diamond looks like and what the quality of the diamond is. Yeah, I'm not an expert, but I mean I can look at it and say, well, this is a good one, and versus stay away from that one. you know.
It's kind of fascinating training, I would think, to have in your arsenal, right? And in addition to everything else that you've done, like that the fact that you were trained in these other areas must have significant value in your present line, in the private sector.
Oh, sure. Yeah, with coins and gems. But I'm not a gemologist. I mean, here, again, I can identify something, but it doesn't mean I can tell you all the fine details about the specific item. It's not that. It's that I can identify it. In other words, there are times at the FBI when I get called in to go look at a painting, and I can say that's no good. Whatever it's being offered as, it's not. You know,
Yeah.
and we just knew. So it wasn't like, but I couldn't, but I couldn't look at a good quality fake and say, oh yeah, that's no, I wouldn't know. See, we have to show it to the experts, but there were times when they were just bad quality.
Did you confer with experts during your cases, or like art professors or museum curators? Did you, involve yourself, with people in the private sector who were experts when you were doing an investigation?
Oh, all the time. Yeah, it depends. I mean, I had backstop, what we call backstopping all over the country. So, if I was working a case involving an antiquity, I could give them the name of a professor somewhere, and they could call that professor and say, "Do you know this guy? Is he a dealer?" And the professor knew that to say that, "Oh yeah, we know him. He's kind of shady. Stay away from him," which is exactly what I wanted him to say.
Right.
And that's perfect. Yeah, I had curators, I had experts. In one case, I was looking at some Ecuadorian artifacts down in Miami, and they were being offered for sale. So I had to determine if they were real or not. I don't know anything about Ecuadorian artifacts. So I found a archaeologist at the at Binghamton University in New York, and I took him down to Miami with me to act as my client because I was acting as a dealer. And I had him go in and look at them and tell me if they were real or not. So he was able to look very closely at them. You know, he was the client. He got very enthusiastic. So when we left, he said, "Oh yeah, they're legit," and that's what I needed to know. So yeah, I use people all the time, experts all the time, who were in the industry.
That's a story he's still telling,
Probably, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
That's the most exciting thing that happened right on that campus in a long time.
Binghamton, yeah, probably
Yeah.
so.
Well, it's been an honor to get to talk to you. Honestly, I could just pick your brain all day long. I think this is a really interesting topic. I think your book is fantastic. I highly recommend, it's a thought-provoking kind of a book. It's interesting. The details are exciting, so it makes it even more interesting because most of the things you talk about are things we know. We all know, we've all heard of these artists that you're talking about, or um, the documents, or Geronimo. I mean, we've all heard of them, whether it's the people or the documents or the item, the artist. Most of this stuff is very famous. I guess that's what gives it its value.
Mm.
Uh, so it makes it all that much more interesting. And again, if you have no idea about the black market and how that sort of thing works, I think your book is a little bit of a blueprint, showing that the tentacles for that field are just far-reaching throughout the world. It's not
Yeah.
even just rich countries, that you think of, that, oh, this is just a problem in first world countries. It's really not. I mean, your investigations took you everywhere, and I think that's fascinating.
Now, see, there's two different types of countries. There's the consumer countries, that's Western Europe, the United States, England, and then you have the origin countries. And many of those are poor countries. Just as an example, right now, about 90% of everything that was in the ground in Peru is gone. It's been taken out and sold. I mean, so just think about that, that all the material from all those the Incan burials and whatnot most of them have been looted. So that's an origin country. That's a supplier country. Same thing in Iraq. So much stuff's been taken out, and in the Middle East, and destroyed or sold out. So this is all material that comes out of these origin countries that, that the consumer countries take. We buy about $80 billion worth of art every year in the United States. 40% of the entire market's here. So we do consume a lot, of the art and cultural property from around the world.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Again, I could just pick your brain all day long. You're a very interesting person. I highly recommend reading the book, and also signing up for the lecture if you can. These stories are, uh, you're going to be on the edge of your seat. They're all great stories. The book's filled with great stories, and you're very eloquent.
There's actually 5 lectures. It's 5 separate, one a week for 5 weeks, and a lot of the stories in the lectures are not in the book. The book was only 300 pages. I can only put so much in, and the publishers at Crown wanted undercover operations. So mostly it's undercover operations, but not everything in my lectures are undercover operations. So it's a little bit different.
And I bet the editors came in and chopped some of it down, right? You had to take
Oh
some
yeah,
some stuff
yeah.
out. Yeah.
They took 100,000 words out. Sure, it's a 110,000 word book, but they took, I don't know, 50, 60,000 words out. Yeah,
That's a lot.
yeah,
Yeah, so this is an opportunity to hear other stuff that's outside the book, and I invite you to come back. I know you're writing, you're continuing to write as well as balance
yeah.
everything else. So please come back, keep talking to me about your career as you're doing things and as you're writing books.
Maybe I'll come back. Maybe next time we'll talk about the Devil's Diary, my
I
second
would
book.
love to.
Yeah, and that's the book involving Alfred Rosenberg, the chief civil scientist for Hitler. And in many respects, he's the person who made Hitler into Hitler. He met him in 1919 when he was just a very young man, and he's one who taught him all these different ideas that became Nazi socialism. So we recovered a 400-page diary that Rosenberg had written, and we did that at the behest of the U.S. Holocaust Museum. So maybe next time I'll come back on and talk to you about books and documents and diaries.
Oh, I would love that. Okay, I'm going to chase you now. You have to come back.
Okay. All right.
So Bob will be back. He'll be back soon. So come back and talk to me about the next book. I'm going to leave it on that cliffhanger and close out the Bobcast. Thank you so much, Bob, and I'll be chasing you to have you back soon.
Okay, Tony, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
You take care. Bye-bye.